Hey everybody, what is going on? Hexalex here, got another Master Duel video for you. So, we're coming at you with a Season 41 tier list. If you haven't seen my last couple of tier list videos, I've sort of adjusted the schedule which I do them. So, moving forward, I'm going to start doing them pretty shortly after the new pack comes out, like this one. This will be so that I can kind of give my impressions going into the pack, and then in a couple of weeks we'll follow up with another tier list and see how the meta has actually shaped up. But for now, we're just going to go ahead and get right on into it, not waste any more time. Right up the top, we have Albaz representing Branded as an archetype. Branded I'm going to throw in the Tier 2 category. Branded Despia has been kind of an eternal mainstay of the Tier 2 slot, but that just shows just how effective the deck is. As time goes on, other decks get more powerful, and Branded, as always, continues to adapt. Alright, next up we have Blue Eyes here. So Primite Blue Eyes was definitely the most played deck of the previous meta. We'll have to see if that ends up being true of this one coming up as well. It's definitely still a tier 1 deck, but I maintained last season that it was not the most powerful deck, and I still think that was true not only before the new pack, but after this one as well. You can probably guess what I'm going to put above Primite Blue Eyes, but we'll get to that when we get to it. Coming up next year, we have Yubel. So Yubel actually saw a pretty nice power boost when Necroquip Princess came out, and with the release of Lacrima, the Crimson Tears, the deck actually only continues to get better. I'm going to put it in Tier 2. Ooh, compared to Branded Despia, I'm going to put it a little bit below, but I actually think they're pretty comparable in terms of power level. Right before Necroquip Princess came out in that meta, again, before she came out, I had Yubel down in Tier 3, but I think these power boosts of the Fiendsmith engine, particularly with the way they let you use Aerial Eater, have been such a good boost of power, as mentioned, for the Yubel deck. A lot more than I think a lot of people realize. It's funny because I feel like I'm only just now starting to see people say that, oh, Yubel fell off, oh, Yubel's a rogue deck. But no, that's definitely not the case as much as it was before. Yubel, well, I don't ever think it was rogue, I think it was Tier 3 before, but Yubel, with the increase of Fiendsmith's power level, definitely directly gets more powerful too. More so than other decks that use Fiendsmith. Well, about as much. You'll see what I mean. Anyway. Here we have Kashtira, which I'm continuously surprised is still seeing as much play as it is, given that it's a very inconsistent deck. Even with the release of 7th Tachyon, it still doesn't have as much consistency as a lot of other higher power level decks. And on top of that, you know, it's also just kind of a weak end board. Really susceptible to board breakers, doesn't put up any negates. Gotta put Kashtira in the rogue category. Tearlaments, I'm probably just going to put in Tier 3. I could see a world where they end up at the bottom of Tier 2, but maybe at the top of Tier 3. So they, as I mentioned before, are the deck that probably got hit the hardest when Beatrice got banned in terms of like how important Fiendsmith was to their deck. And I know there have been some builds that have been going around where you use the Pilgrim Reaper as a rank 6 to mill 5. And that is quite good, don't get me wrong. I think that is still definitely worth playing Fiendsmith in Tearlament for. But going from a guaranteed fusion to a mill, which is ultimately at the end of the day going to be a gamble, does kind of lean into this like gambling sort of consistency issue with tier limit. Now, I will say that tier limit is definitely, even with all the limits, still consistent enough that you can mill 5 and you're reasonably likely to hit something good. But at the end of the day, you are always going to kind of be relying on those mills. And even if you have really good odds, you know, there are other decks who can just 100% of the time go into their combo line off of Fiendsmith stuff and not have to worry about hoping that they mill the right thing. So at the end of the day, that is going to ultimately weaken tier limit in terms of not only its consistency, but also its end board, because the end board of tier limit is also pretty hugely varied depending on what you actually end up milling. So I think that's kind of what holds tier limit back more than anything else. In previous metas, you don't really feel that as much because even, you know, a below average tier limit board was still a pretty average end board in terms of power level, but as decks get better, tier limit definitely feels that RNG aspect more and more. Next up we have Sky Strikers. Sky Strikers I'm going to continue to put in Rogue. They did get some more support in the most recent set that I think just came out in the OCG. Yeah, it was in the OCG called Duelist Advance. And when that comes, that'll be another significant buff to the power level of Sky Striker. But that's still going to be quite a ways away. And until that time, maybe even after that time still, but until that time, I'm going to keep Sky Strikers in the Rogue tier. Now, don't get me wrong, as I mentioned many times in the past, decks that are in the Rogue tier are definitely still capable of reaching Master 1, or topping a tournament. It just might take a more dedicated pilot. They're just not quite as powerful as some of these other tiered decks. So, and of course, also, if a deck isn't featured here, that doesn't mean it's worse necessarily than Rogue. It just means that, I only could feature 25 decks for the sake of time. If I talked about every single deck that was viable, as far as like literally every single deck that I thought could reach Master 1 or top a tournament, we'd probably be looking at least 100. I might actually do that for a video someday. Let me know if you want to see that in the comments below, if you want to see me rank like literally every archetype that's even a little competitively viable. Alright, Ritual Beast. One of those decks that you don't see too often, which makes it a little difficult to place on a tier list, because if you don't have much experience with or against it, it is kind of difficult to gauge its power level. It's one of those ones where I'm more relying on what I see from, tournament and rating duel and duel skep results, and historically Ritual Beast has always performed well, when played under the most skilled pilots, who are about the only ones playing, the deck. When piloted very well, I think that Ritual Beast is probably an upper tier 2 deck. It is slowly, I think, starting to slide off a little bit in terms of power level compared to what everything else is doing. But, make no mistake, it is still an extremely good deck. Alright, so here next we have Punk. I love Punk. It's one of my favorite archetypes. Easy top 5, I think, for favorite archetypes for me right now. And did receive 2 very significant pieces of very powerful support, which means that Punk is going to be our newest Rogue deck. Yeah. Punk is very popular right now, but it's always important to remember that popularity and power level are 2 different things. I think a lot of people confuse that in the previous meta, where Primate Blue Eyes saw so much more play that people were like, oh, I guess Blue Eyes is better than stuff like Snake Eye. I don't think that's necessarily true. I just think Blue Eyes was more prominent because it was more popular. Again, those 2 things don't always 100% correlate. So that's going to be true going the other way for Punk. Punk is seeing a ton of popularity and, well, actually going the same way. It's seeing a ton of popularity, but that is not an indicator of that's how strong it is. I think that at the end of the day, Punk is still an upper Rogue level deck. Well, I guess to be fair, beforehand, it was like a mid to maybe even lower level Rogue deck, because before, Punk just always got stopped by a single negate, which what other deck in the meta is that true of right now, right? Valor, Imperm, Ash Blossom on Rising Card before the new support, and before the integration of stuff like Fiendsmith was always enough to just end a Punk player's turn. But now it's definitely a lot more feasible to push through hand traps, which is quickly becoming a necessity in competitive Yu-Gi-Oh! Alright, so Memento is going to be kind of one of those sleeper decks like Ritual Beast in terms of it doesn't see a lot of play because it is very difficult to play, but it is a very, very strong deck. Enough so that I'm actually going to put Memento in the tier 1 category. I don't think even when played optimally, it's necessarily quite as strong as a Primate Blue Eyes deck that's also played optimally. I think they're very, very close though. This is definitely one of those metas, like there have been a lot recently, actually in recent memory, where the power difference between each of these decks, even across like tier 1 to tier 2, or tier 2 to tier 3, or tier 3 to Rogue, right? These differences are not super great, right? It's not like, tier limit meta where tier limit was so far above everything else. I think we arguably had a taste of that, not only when Snake Eye first came out, and also like when Bonfire was at 3, but also with Tenpai meta. I think Tenpai, when it first came out, was actually at a pretty decently high power level above everything else, but stuff right now feels pretty similar in terms of power level, or a lot closer than it has in previous metas. Alright, so I have Fiendsmith Engraver here to represent Fiendsmith control decks. This could be Fiendsmith Primite, Fiendsmith Bestial, playing the Cybers cards, and or DPE. It represents a number of different decks that kind of encompass the same archetype. A Fiendsmith control style deck. That doesn't necessarily explosively combo to OTK, but to maintain board control and eke out a win over, the course of maybe 3 to 4 turns. So these kinds of decks are actually very, very good right now, and I'm going to put them in the Tier 2 category. They're not like the most popular, but they're seeing a good amount of play, especially as time goes on and these archetypes like Fiendsmith and Primite, continue to come out and or get more support. And the new Fiendsmith cards are actually pretty much at their best in Fiendsmith control. Lacrima, the Crimson Tears, you actually can play multiple copies in that deck, and same with Rextremend, you definitely can play that in Fiendsmith control quite well, as well as make use of the Trap card that was in the previous set, I believe, actually, or whatever the first set Fiendsmith came out in, but is now a lot more useful thanks to Lacrima, the Crimson Tears. So yeah, Fiendsmith control, very, very good deck. I think I might even... I'm kind of debating where in Tier 2 I want to put it. I think I will keep it actually below Branded and Yubel for now, but I can change my mind. I can see it being up here as well. I can see an argument going for that either way. These 3 decks are all, I think, fairly similar in power level. Alright, Centurion. So Centurion... This is actually kind of interesting. I'm honestly debating if I want to put it in Tier 2 or Tier 3. Because the Chimera Primus was quite good. Don't get me wrong. You know what? I guess to be fair, Centurion did also actually see a buff with the release of Lacrima the Crimson Tears. Because you can go... Like, if you play the Lina and Magistus Chorozo, you can go Fiendsmith into Centurion plays. Like, I want to almost put Centurion at the top of Tier 3. Actually, I feel like this would make more sense if I was going to do something like that. Putting Centurion at the bottom of Tier 2 and then Fiendsmith control at the top of Tier 3 feels more right to me. So I'm going to leave it like that for now, but subject to change as always. Could change that moving forward. Voiceless Voice. A deck that has not seen a lot of updates, but continues to just maintain its position as a very solid Tier 2 deck. Actually, quite a good one. I almost want to put it just below Ritual Beast here. But there is also part of me that wants to put it like between Branded and Yubel. I think that might actually be a better spot for it. Because it is a very good deck, but... It's just, yeah, it's one of those that's tricky to place because you don't see it a lot on ladder. I actually did face against Voiceless Voice relatively recently, and it is a very scary deck when it gets going. I actually got pretty lucky my opponent didn't see low like the whole game, and I was able to use all my negates on like Skull Guardian as I was trying to search low and other various stuff, and just remembering how that game played out now. Yeah, I mean, you have to be very aggressive with how you negate it and keep it off of stuff. Yeah, I'll keep it here in the middle of Tier 2. I think that's a good spot for it. And speaking of Tier 2, I'm going to throw Tenpai here as well, but actually, am I? I think I will. I'm going to put it below Yubel. No, I'll put it above Yubel, actually. We'll do it like that. That feels right to me. Yeah, I think Tenpai is definitely, despite all the hits, still a very solid Tier 2 deck. Not quite at the same power level as I mentioned before, where it did feel like it was at least a little, a significant, not a little, but a significant a bit above everything else. But yeah, that time is long since passed. I think that it is a pretty firm Tier 2 deck. Drytron. Let's see, Drytron I'm going to put in Rogue below Punk. Just continues to be one of those decks where it's really good when it gets going, but it's just a lot more susceptible to hand traps than other stuff in the meta. Well, it's not even necessarily that it's more susceptible, because it just has a harder time pushing through hand traps is a better way to say it. Because, all these other meta decks can still get hand trapped. It's not like Drytron gets hand trapped more often. It's just that these decks have a lot more ways to have plays afterward than Drytron. Yeah, I'll keep it there. White Forest. So White Forest is interesting because the Rextremend that just came out actually does help the White Forest deck, but it's just been kind of falling off, I feel like, a little bit in terms of popularity. And the more I think about that, the more I kind of understand why, right? It's funny because people I see sometimes say about Yubel that, oh, why play Yubel when you could play Snake Eye, and pretty much do the same thing except better. But I kind of find that to be more true when comparing White Forest to Snake Eye. Now, granted, they don't really do the same thing. I don't think that's true of Snake Eye and Yubel at all either. But in terms of being decks that are, long form combo that can utilize Fiendsmith well. I don't know, I just feel like the Snake Eye board has more versatility to it. Like there's a lot more ways you can play through stuff. It might just be the White Forest requires more nuance. I don't know. I guess the thing that I'm debating about is if I want to put White Forest at the top of tier 3. Do I think White Forest is worse than Centurion? I think the answer is actually yes, but not by a lot. So I think I'm going to keep it like this. Because like I said before, even the difference between the worst tier 2 deck and the best tier 3 deck is really not that significant in a meta like this. Argostars, I think, is a really cool archetype from the latest selection pack. However, I am going to put it in Rogue. Here's the thing, actually. Argostars supporting continuous trap cards, specifically continuous trap monsters, will be more impactful as time goes on, because there are actually, slowly over the course of the next few paper sets that have yet to come out in Master Duel, there are more and more support cards for the continuous trap monster archetype. And I do think there will come a day where those end up culminating into something that is, competitively, not just viable. I think Argostars is competitively viable, but like competitively successful on a more widespread scale. That said, Argostars currently, with the current card pool, I think is going to be towards the lower end of Rogue for this tier list here. I'm also going to put the Exodia deck down here as well. The, Millennium deck that actually goes into Unstoppable Exodia Incarnate. It's still a pretty nice beginner-friendly deck because of how easy to play it is, and also nostalgia is nice, but at the same time, if you want a beginner-friendly nostalgia deck, I'd honestly just go for Primite Blue Eyes. It is definitely more difficult to play than Unstoppable Exodia, but Primite Blue Eyes I don't find to be a particularly difficult deck to learn. Unstoppable Exodia is only easier because it's literally just like go Millenniums into search Ankh, into activate Ankh, into summon Unstoppable Exodia, into set Exod. And that's really all you have to do, right? But Primate Blue Eyes is, turn 1 line. Well, of course, more nuanced. I don't think it's terribly difficult. And yeah, again, if you want beginner-friendly nostalgia, you can play a much more powerful deck. Adamancipator. I'm going to put that in Upper Rogue. I know I've kind of shit-talked Adamancipator a little bit recently, saying it's not really that good. I guess what I more should have emphasized is that it's not as good as I think a lot of people make it out to be. It's the ultimate boogeyman as far as people who more adhere to TCG lists. They see Curious stepping Block Dragon to end on a board with Appaloosa and Borreload Savage and Baron, and they're like, but those are banned when I play. That has to be OP. And it's actually not. It's completely fine. I know a lot of people will point to Maxi and Fuelos, but I don't think it's just that. One, because that's true of literally every deck in the format. Yeah, I know that Maxi and Fuelos being legal are going to impact certain decks harder than others, but long form combo decks definitely still see success in formats without them. But on top of that, Adamancipator is also just so much more susceptible to hand traps, right? I was talking about before with Punk about how what other deck in the meta just gets hard stopped by one Veiler, Ash Blossom, or Imperm? Well, I think that's also very true of Adamancipator. When they go into the Curious, stump the Block Dragon, if you negate the Curious, or if you negate the Gallant Granite that searches the Block Dragon, they actually just end their turn, I'm not exaggerating, probably 75% of the time at that point. It is definitely a turn stopper on one single negate, which again is just not something you can really afford to be susceptible to in current, 2025 competitive Yu-Gi-Oh! But there are a lot of ways to play the deck. You can play it in 60 cards with other archetypes to help, mitigate that. Even the 40 card variants are still definitely not bad at all. So I think Upper Rogue, just below Punk, is a good spot for Adamancipator. And I think it's also a pretty good spot for Hero. You know what, though? I do think Sky Striker is better than Hero and Drytron. But yeah, I'll put Hero right here. Yeah, I said it before in my review of the new cards as they were coming out, but the new hero support I don't think changes Hero's position at all in terms of power level. Now, don't get me wrong, the Evil Hero Neos Lord is quite good, and the Evil Assault is definitely another consistency tool that's not bad, but I think ultimately they don't really change the position of heroes or change how they play. Moreover, they don't shore up its weaknesses, which, you know, like Drytron, like a lot of other decks I've mentioned, just has a more difficult time pushing through hand traps and negates than other decks in this meta. So Dragon Link I actually have seen making a resurgence since the, Metal Morph stuff has come out, and it actually did boast a very, very high win rate on Untapped when I was doing my research, at 60% in Master Rank in last season. That said, win rate alone is not an indication of how good a deck is overall, because it could be a few dedicated pilots who play the deck particularly well, who are, sort of increasing the numbers, and it certainly wasn't a ton of people who are playing Dragon Link. So I'm going to put it in Rogue, but I'm actually going to put it right about here, even a little bit above Hero, because I think that it does have a little bit more ability. It's pretty comparable to Adamancipator, I think, in terms of like long-form combo deck that is, more susceptible to hand traps and stuff up here, but better at pushing through it than stuff down here. The gist of every tier list, really. Mathmech is absolutely going to be a tier 3 deck, and is honestly kind of falling on its way down to Rogue category as time goes on, which pains me to say. I love Mathmech, and I think it's a really, really fun archetype. It's a great mission deck. If you're looking for a deck that clears a bunch of missions in like one duel, Mathmech can very consistently, in my experience, with one win clear like 3 missions pretty much every single time. But it's also just a good, for me, turn your brain off and just play Master Duel for a little bit deck if I want to throw like YouTube on the side or something. But yeah, obviously when other Cybers archetypes come out, we'll look at Mathmech again and see if it ends up getting a boost in power, not even necessarily as its own deck, but maybe even as a supplement to other Cybers decks. And there might even come a point where, for that reason, I think more than anything else, Circular would need to get limited, possibly. But yeah, as it stands right now, it's just really not that powerful a deck compared to everything else. Labrynth, I will definitely be putting in tier 2. And, I actually am going to put it kind of alongside. I'll put it a little bit above Branded. Yeah, that seems pretty good. I mean, it's what I always say about Lab is the fact that because it's an archetype that's centered around normal trap cards, it just has so much versatility. I think that's why you continue to see it do so well in like rating duels season after season after season, in Duelist Cups, month after month, year after year, is because it's not hard for the deck to keep up with the meta. Not only can you shift what normal trap cards you're playing to counter the meta, but like normal trap cards is a very broad range of cards, right? And more powerful normal trap cards are being printed, with every set as sets come out, as time goes on. So it's a deck that can pretty naturally keep up in terms of power level in that regard, which is pretty cool, actually. It's very well designed in that way. All right, here we have Chimera. I'm going to end up putting Chimera in tier 3. This might be a little bit low. I will say this is another one of those decks that I don't end up playing against a lot, but I know under a good pilot can do quite well. But I don't know. Yeah, I just think about it compared to something. I compare it to other similar decks like Voiceless and Ritual Beast that are fall under that same category, and it just does feel like it is a little bit of a step down from decks like that. Not a horrible deck by any means. Of course, it is. A tier 3 deck is still tiered, but yeah, I'll put it here in the middle of tier 3. Alright, finally on Snake Eyes, which, as I've alluded to many times, I am just going to put in tier 1 as the best deck of the format. Of course, it received a pretty nice power boost with the new Fiendsmith support. You can now go Millennium into Fiendsmith into full Snake Eye combo without needing to actually open Snake Eye cards or just get lucky milling with Zombie Vamp, which is pretty cool. But I think even without that, and I think this was true before this set came out, Snake Eye has just been the most powerful deck. It's like I said before, Primite Blue Eyes might have seen significantly more play in the previous meta, but I think Snake Eyes in its variants were still stronger overall than Primite Blue Eyes. Not by a ton, as I've been saying, but certainly significantly enough to stand out as the best deck in the current format. And finally, we have Mermail Atlantean, another new release from the latest selection pack. And I'm going to end up putting this one in Rogue, a little bit above these other like longer form combo decks. Now, here's the thing. We don't have Totally Awesome. That's obviously going to be a bit of an issue for this deck. I don't think that makes the deck unplayable. There are some people who are just completely disregarding it altogether for that reason. The deck still has a lot of, competitive oomph behind it and has seen competitive success in the OCG where Totally Awesome is banned. That said, I don't think it'll do quite as well as it did in the TCG when in the TCG they could go Bahamut Shark into Totally Awesome. I know Bahamut Shark recently got banned in the TCG, and this deck I think has still seen competitive success in spite of that, I think. So that doesn't surprise me though. Being an upper rogue deck, as mentioned before, there's a lot of room for it to have a good amount of competitive success. Alright, so I'm looking at this tier list here, and yeah, I think this looks pretty good to me. This is where I'm going to leave it. So let me know what you think in the comments below. But either way, thank you for watching all the way until the very end of the video. That is very helpful. Even if you just skip till the end to see where I ended up putting everything, I do really appreciate you watching and that you are invested enough to know where I put everything. Thank you for your viewership all the same. Speaking of thanks, we now have to thank some extra special viewers, the YouTube members and patrons, without whom it would not be possible for me to put out as many videos as I do. It really does mean a lot to me, those of you who do choose to support in that manner, and it really does go a long way, so thank you all very much. Let's all thank them now in our outro. Hey everybody, Hexlex here. Thank you so very much for watching all the way to the very end of the video, which by the way is one of the best ways to support the channel. Speaking of supporting the channel, take a look at the names on screen. These are folks who have been so generous as to either join as a YouTube member or subscribe over on patreon.com/Hexlex to support. There's also perks for doing so. If you would like to see YouTube videos early, as well as some exclusive videos that get uploaded to YouTube, but for one reason or another I decide not to publish, definitely go ahead and hit that join button to see content early as well as some exclusive content. If you're looking for more exclusive content, over on patreon.com, I upload exclusive videos that are not posted on YouTube just about every single day. Whether you choose to subscribe over on Patreon, join as a YouTube member, or simply continue to watch, your support is greatly appreciated. Thank you so very much. But for now, this is Hexlex. I am signing out, and I hope that you have a fantastic day.